Hello and welcome to this video on becoming a Dynamics functional consultant. So this is going to be our second or third assignment that we want to do. And in this section, we're going to cover Power Automate. We're going to explore what are automations and how does Power Automate help us in realizing those automations. Before we start, I want to do a quick recap of what we have discussed so far. We so far in the playlist that is for becoming a functional consultant, we have a video on Dynamics 365 customer service, what it is, because it is super important to get an overview of one of the Dynamics applications if you want to start off with a functional consulting goal. If you know all of them, that's good, but you can at least start with one of them to specialize. And Dynamics customer service is a good one to start off with. After that, we also see how we can basically create tables, how we can add columns, and how we can make them visible in the app that is used for Dynamics 365 customer service. And then we also have an exercise of creating your own model-driven app from the scratch. And this takes us to our next assignment, Power Automate. Eventually, the idea is that with all these sessions, we're going to cover all of these possibilities that we have to customize the system because, yes, you also have other options, but we'll start off with the ones that are easier to tackle in the beginner section, and as and when we complete these, we'll move into the advanced section. Okay, so in this video, we're going to focus on Power Automate, as I mentioned, and I want to reiterate it again. You have to go through make.powerapps.com. You have to select the right solution. In this case, I've selected my customer service solution, and herein I can start adding more components. What is the requirement that we want to do? Our requirement is whenever a new case is created, I want to already create an investigation record for the user who created the case to have some preliminary investigation filled in. And then slowly, we will build towards seeing if we need more investigations from other departments or if that's enough, and so on and so forth. This is our case record, and in our previous session, we created a new table called case investigations, and then we linked that case investigations to a case so that on a case level, you can see what are the ongoing investigation records that we have. So in this case, our end result is going to be whenever a case record has been created, a new investigation record will be created and it will be tied up and visible to the case investigation. And then that agent will itself start working on the case investigations. So let's start off with our first requirement where we start off with creating a Power Automate. Any business transformation, any automations that we want to do, because this is also an automation. When you create a case, a record is automatically created. So basically it's a guided instructions for the users and they don't need to create their own records. It's just there. And then this is useful in two ways. You save time from your users to actually create the record using the system, so using automation. You avoid any possible typos and errors that the user can make if they're making it manually. And third, it's more of like a user instruction. So the moment they create a case record, we basically create also a record for them. Okay, let's have a look. So for any kind of automation where you need to create a new record or you need to update some fields on a record automatically, and the best way to go forward is to using automations. If you want to do it before a case is saved, then you could go for business rules. I think it's worthwhile having one more session once we complete this on the difference between what can be a business rule and what's a Power Automate flow. So when we click on automation, you have a lot of different options. You have cloud flow, which can be automated, instant, and scheduled. What are these? We will also talk about that, and then you can also create actions, business process flows, and workflows. We start off with cloud flows. This is the way to go because this is also something as a part of Power Platform. It's super easy to build, but the processes that you see here, they are more traditional. So this is used to be leveraged for building automations traditionally, but Microsoft has moved towards cloud flows. There are very few use cases where we use these, and those use cases we will also tackle soon. So we start off with creating a cloud flow. Most often than normal, it's going to be an automated cloud flow. Why? Because automated flows are event driven in the sense that if a user changes things, or if a record is created, or if a record is updated, or a record is deleted, um, in these moments you can basically trigger the Power Automate flow. However, it is also possible to use instant flows, which is by its icon says you click on the flow itself to trigger it and let it do some actions, and then scheduled that the flow runs, let's say, every Friday at 10 o'clock or every day 6 o'clock in the morning, etc., etc. Because if I were to read the requirement and translate it into technical solution, I would read it something like this: when a case record is created. So in this case, when a case record is created, then you create one more record. This is how it sounds like to me. So in this case, I will click on automated, and when I do that, it shows me an option to fill the name. So let's call it case because it's structured on case. So a naming convention is important when you are trying to make these workflows. You cannot just make it anything. So normally, one of the best practices is to start off with the table on which it's going to be built, because the trigger is on case creation. So the table that leads to the event is case. That's why we say case. It's easy. Why it's good to name is because then it's also easier for others to find, okay, what are the automations built on case tables? What are the automations built on account, etc. Okay, so case and then create a case investigation for the owner, which summarizes completely. And then for any kind of developments that we need to build on Power Automate, especially for Dynamics, we use Dataverse. And this is the most used connector, which is called when a row is modified, added, or deleted. I will select this and I will say create. And you see that the trigger is already added. A flow will never be without a trigger. So a trigger has to be there, and you need to know when the flow needs to fire off. It is super important. Whenever you have a requirement, do realize when it needs to go off. In our case, the change type is going to be added because we want it to trigger when a case record is created, and creation basically means addition. You also have other options like you see added or deleted. So if you want to your flow to be triggered every time a record, in this case a case record, is created and deleted, then you will use added or deleted. If you want it to trigger when a case record is added, but let's say one or more fields on the case record, such as case title is modified or subject is modified, then you use added or modified. The rest everything, it's super easy to understand. So if it's only deleted, then the flow will only go off when the record is deleted. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select added, and then it asks you to select a table because there are so many tables in the database of Dynamics. You need to tell the flow, fine, you need to trigger when a record is added, but which table? So in this case, it will be case, because whenever a new row is added or when a record is created for cases, then it needs to go off. The scope is set to organization. You can keep it like that. I'm not going to go into detail. Also not for these ones, they are not relevant at this moment, but there are also other functions of select columns and filter rows. Select columns, I can talk about it. Had we had chosen added or modified or just modified, then you need to specify the exact fields. Otherwise, every time everything changes in case, it will go off. So you need to make sure that it needs to go off only when it's supposed to. It's important. These things that I mentioned, they are super important. So be very attentive to these details. And if you have any questions, you can also put them as comments and I will try to answer them. And I will give it a logical name when a case is created. Because what this means this is a function. This functionally it means when a case is created. But what it technically means is, for flow, it's important to specify the table name is case and creation is added. So whenever it talks about creation, added, and table you name, you always need to specify. So if we go back to a requirement, that requirement was when a case is created, create a new record for me for case investigation. And the case investigation record will be for the owner of the record, owner of the owner of the case. So in this case, when a case record is created, in this case it is Suyash, then a case investigation for Suyash will also be created. Then I will say my first part is completed when a case is created, so my trigger is there, but now we need to add actions. Our flow is not possible to save if you keep it half open, and this also doesn't make sense. It just triggers and does nothing. So if I click on save, it says you should have at least one trigger and one action. This is super important. Okay. So whenever you are building on automations, keep this in mind. You need to know what the trigger is going to be, and it can only be one trigger, but actions can be more. You can keep adding actions as many as you want. In this case, we need to create a new record. So again, think of it from a database point of view, because now you're a functional consultant. So you're not just thinking as an end user where you see a case record, but you're also thinking as a functional consultant. So you have to think about tables. You have to think about the database. We are not going to skip that, and that will never be skipped. So that's why the database is Dataverse. When you click on this, it shows you all the possibilities you can make on the database using one of these actions. Logically, we have to add a new row. So we select add a new row. And then it is such a guided method. It literally asks you what you need to fill in. So what row you want to add in. So do you want to add a new case? No. We need to add a new case investigation. So let's just type case investigations and see what happens. I have an option to select it. So now I am telling the flow, when a case is created, add a new row for case investigations. But it asks me to fill in these values, because if I just create a blank case investigation, it also doesn't make sense. So it says, by the way, it's warning you, these things need to be filled in. Okay, so we start filling them in. We start with the easy ones that we can quickly fill in, and then we fill in others later. So what is the investigation type? Let's say for the first investigation that we're going to do is just a general investigation. So I say go ahead and do a general investigation. The name, we can automatically name it as well. So we can say we will use the name as the title of the case dash who the case investigation is assigned to. So in this case, the owner name, which is a tricky one, because owner is basically a lookup field. We talked about this in our previous video as well. And a lookup field has a very different behavior, and it requires a little bit more mastering into before you really start working with them. I will move on to this part at the end, but I will say we'll keep it like owner of the field. And then we'll see what other fields need to fill in. Case investigation officer and case. So the case investigation officer in this case is going to be the owner of the case. So here we can say it will be the owner of the case. And here we need to specify what the case is going to be. Because if you create an investigation, it will be an orphan if you don't specify to which case it needs to refer to which case it needs to be linked to. If you don't fill in this, how it would look like is a case investigation record will be created. However, it will not be linked to the case that was created. So if I create a new case, and if I don't specify it, an orphan investigation record will be created. So I need to specify the case. Fortunately, that also I have. So I have filled in now, and now we're going to get into the explanation, what exactly I've done so far. The flow is smart enough to tell you when this case is triggered, it basically picks up all the values of the case and shows you in the dynamic text. So what it says is you can choose from, I'm going to delete everything and then we start again because I showed you what the outcome is going to be. Now we'll see how do we get to that. In the name, we want to fill in the title of the case, right? How do we get the title of the case? Because the title of the case is a property or is a field on case, when this trigger happens, all those properties will be accessible to you in all the subsequent steps. I will reiterate in a different form because this is the crux. Once you get the hang of this one, everything is going to be super easy. When this flow fires off, the flow knows which record it has triggered for. And then it also, for your own convenience, it gathers all the field that you have for case because you may be using it for the automation further ahead. And in this case, we do need all that information. We do need to know what the case is going to be because we want to specify it here. It is useful to have that information. So the previous step, that's why you see here, when a case is created, all the underlying fields for that record to which context this trigger happened, all those fields will be visible for you to select from. So I can choose any of the field values to leverage ahead in my automation to use in conditions. So if the case has this value, do this. If the case has that value, do this. If the case title is blank, do this. If the case title has this text, do this. So all of those things are possible. But because we're trying to keep the automation to a very basic, to first understand the concept of Power Automate and how to work with that, we'll keep it very limited. So here I have to refer to a case. It's a rule of thumb when you need to refer to a record. In this case, you're referring to a record. It says you need to specify the case. That's why I say underscore cases. Any of the field where you need to refer to a record, they have a bracket and the name of the table at the end of it to indicate this is a lookup. This is a reference to a record. It's not just a plain text field. It's not just an option set like this where you have the option to select it yourself. Here you can enter whatever you want, doesn't matter. So it will literally create it like this. But in these cases, you have to give a unique identifier to the record, which you would never remember and which you should never hard code. It's just not possible. So what you can ask is, and this you can ask to the flow itself, what is the ID of the case for which the flow is running? And what you do is you just type the name of the record, the name of the table, it's a case, and then it shows you a lot of options. How do you know which is the ID? You use unique identifier. This for whatever field it says unique identifier, that is the field you need to use. In most of the scenarios, there are some exceptions where you'll also see entity instance. That is also the one you can choose. So when either of these things are available, just use it and it should be okay. So I select cases and now it's okay. The red error has disappeared. And then I want to fill in who the case investigation officer is going to be. In this case, it has to be the owner of the case, which is again a field on the case, so it should be accessible to us. And because this is a lookup, it's a reference to a record, we don't need to specify the name of the user. We don't need to specify anything else because it will fail. You need to specify the unique identifier. So we'll search for owner field. And for owner, you get a lot of things. And here you can say value. Because an owner field is a field with multiple properties, it's a reference to a record. That's why you also see different options available. But every time you need to specify or refer to a record ID, you always use the name of the field and then followed by underscore value. The one that says value is the one that refers to the unique identifier on the record. So I will select it here and this is okay. And then for the name, I will just say title. Okay, now it's ready. And then I can give it a name, create a case investigation. In two steps, we build this automation. Earlier, this used to be done using workflows, or sometimes it can get so complicated you have to build plugins using C Sharp. With Power Automate, you don't have to. Right? It's a simple automation built simply. I also made a mistake on purpose for these, because this is the thing that you need to master. This is the thing that requires more attention. So I made a mistake on purpose because you will be getting these kind of issues. So I want you to get it firsthand before you start working with it and realize if this kind of error happens, what to do. So I'm saving it now. And in this case, I know this is going to fail. I did not add one of the properties for these lookups, and that's why it's going to fail. And we will see what the issue we get. Okay, my flow has been saved. I can go back and you can look for my flow. I will say cloud flows. The portal is a bit slow. Yeah. So this is our flow. And when you click on it, this is how it looks like. You can turn it on or off from here. You can edit it by clicking here. And every time this flow runs, it generates a log for you to help you troubleshoot. And we will also see that. So now I've created the flow. I'm going to create a case and we're going to see how it triggers and how it fails. Test case 1. And then we select a customer. These are the mandatory fields. And once we do that, we can save it. This is our trigger for the flow to go off because our case record has been created. So this is a trigger, because on the trigger we said when a case record is added, then trigger. So now if I go back to my flow, the flow would have been triggered. So I will click on refresh to see the logs. You see it triggered. It says 15 seconds ago, duration, how long it took to run the flow, it's fast, and the status that it failed. I was expecting a failure because, as I mentioned already. So now, whenever you get a failure in a Power Automate flow, and this is one of the beauty, you can directly look into the logs and troubleshoot for it and look into what the issue is. So when I click on this log, it says, okay, this step went fine. And you see in this output, it picks up all the values that we are using. It's all blah, 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 blah. But it's a matter of getting used to. This is something we need to get used to. And then it says case investigations. It failed here. And what is the error? URL was not passed due to an OData or unorganization exception. And this is the more important thing. Resource not found for the segment provided in the URL. So if you look at this, this is what we sent as an input. The table name is case investigation. The ID of the case is this, and this is the ID that we fill in. This is the ID of the owner. The case investigation type was general, which has a number 4. So Microsoft did that for us. And the name is test case 1, which is the title of the case. So these things went well, but the reason why we had this as an issue is because whenever you work with a lookup, and whenever you say resource not found for the segment of the URL, it basically refers to the fact that, and I'm going to edit it now because that was a log. So when I click on edit, it shows me the flow. Every time you specify lookup, you also need to provide the technical name of the table next to it. And this will be in bracket like this. And you need to provide the technical name in a plural form. So how do you get that? There are multiple ways of getting that. So one of the things that I can recommend you is, let's say if you have cases, you can just directly go in here and say peak code, and you know that here, maybe this is a bit too challenging for you, but the entity name is incident. So this is the technical name of case. And if I want to use it in plural, incident becomes incidents. But if I need to do this for the user table, we don't know what it's going to be. So one of the things that you can do is you can open the record, any record of the kind user. So I clicked on Suyash Pandey, that the user of this record, the owner of this record. And when you open the record, on the top you see the URL, and it says ETN equals system user. In the URL, everything that is after ETN and before N is the technical name of the table. So you just copy it in. So if, let's say for this case, just to see one more example of this, if I want the technical name of cases, then I need to open a case record. I go back and I open the case record. And then after ETN, we have incident, just like we used here, incidents. In the same way, I'm going to go back to that record. I'm going to click it, and I want to know this is the user record, like you see here, and then the ETN is going to be system user. So I'm just going to copy this text. I'm going to put this bad boy in brackets and say system users, and there we go. Okay, and then you save. And now our flow will succeed. So if I create a new case record, it should be okay. But because it is so beautifully built, you can also just use previous logs to rerun it and see if it works. So I will go back to case, and here my record should appear as a case investigation. And then I say, when you click on test, you have the option to select manually or automatically. When you select automatically, it will give you an option. Do you want to use a recent trigger that we use? Yes, because we had run it once. So we'll click it here. Yes, run it on the same record. So the record where it failed, it will use all the property of that record and it will run there. So I'll click on test and let's see if it fails this time or it succeeded. You see the flow ran successfully. And this is something you could also go back to your logs and see. Yes, it succeeded. And now if I see here, it ran. It ran twice, but it did run. Okay. So I'll create one more case just to finalize our requirement, just to test it if it works. So let's say final testing for this requirement. I will create a case record. I'll fill in the mandatory fields, customer, and save. And now I should see here appearing one more record. Like I said, it's there, right? Which is so easy. So when I create a new case, I know that I already need to start filling the testing requirements. Okay. So this was the first automation. But let's say if I want to build further automations, how would that look like? And these are the kind of requirements that you normally go when you're in a project. So if this happens, do this. In the same way, I can have one more requirement. Let's build one more Power Automate flow. In this case, because we want to keep pursuing more and more requirements, more and more use cases of what are the different and the most used scenarios when you work with Power Automate flows. And this time, we can also extend the flow. We can say, all right, when a case is created, do create a case investigation, but also check if the customer has an annual revenue of more than 100K, then make the case a high priority case. So let's see if we have the field priority also somewhere here mentioned. Okay, it's not on the form, but it is somewhere else. I can see it. It is here. And this is our next connect to headers, because some things are important that they should always be in the highlight here. So that's why when what was created, what is the status of the case, the owner, and the priority. A priority, if you look at this, is an option set with three values: high, normal, low. I did not change it to normal. It could also be no priority, blank. But this already tells you a lot, that it seems like there is a field called priority with three values, and its default value is normal. So every time a case is created, it gets a normal priority. But okay, moving back to our requirement, whenever a case is created, um, also update the priority based on what the client information is, what the account, the related customer revenue is. So what we do now is, we already have a trigger event, right? So sometimes you will be too tempted to create another automate flow, use a trigger case created on. But in this case, we can just use the same Power Automate flow and continue to build on top of it. So when a case is created, create a case investigation, but then check if the customer has a revenue of higher than 200K. If yes, update it to yeah, high priority. Otherwise, do nothing. So this calls for a check or a condition, because it only needs to be changed conditionally. So we click on new step and we search for condition. And you see in the actions, you get a condition. It's a part of control. When you click on control, you see a lot of options, and we'll soon get into all of them. But for now, we'll keep it simple and we'll say condition. And by its definition, Power Automate gives you a very nice UI condition, so where it evaluates what you are filling in. If it's true, then it goes here and executes any action that you've configured under this box. Otherwise, executes this. If you leave it blank, then it does nothing. So I can say, and here I'll go for my dynamic content and I will see what the field name is. I go to customer and I say annual revenue. Annual revenue. But I find nothing. Why? Because if you look closely, the dynamic content shows you fields from all the steps that are just above it. So create a case investigation. So any field that you want to use from case investigation, they are visible to be used. Also, a second section for when a case is created. Sequentially, you see the first one that's just above it, and further on. But there is nothing for annual revenue. Because why? Because that field does not sit on case at all. That field sits on a related record. So it's on a lookup. I know the lookup is, it's also very difficult to master. So you have to be very patient and attentive and try this again and again. You have to build this for yourself to be able to get a hang of it. It's super, super important. It's on this field, the customer. So what we do is, because for customer, if we want to look, the only thing that we will have available from case record would be the ID of this customer. Not all the fields that are existing on this record will be visible. So what you need to do is, you need to get all the fields properties, or at least the field that you want to use. What you do have is the ID of the record. So you can always ask Power Automate to say, dear Power Automate, I have the ID of the record. I will give you the ID of the record. Can you fetch me all the properties of that record so that I can use annual revenue from there? Let's see if there is a way. So what we can do is, we can, before the condition, add one more step. And because we need to get the record from the database, so we use Dataverse. And let's see if we can find any connectors there. Add a new row? No. Delete a row? No. Download a file image? No. Get a row by ID. That sounds like interesting. So let's click on this. Get a row by ID. And what table it is? So when I click on this record, it's an account, right? So that's what the table is going to be. I want you to get me an account record. So you select the table in accounts, and it says, I will get it to you, but I have so many records on an account table. Which record ID should I really get for you, right? And in this case, what you specify is, if I go back to the case, I want you to give me the record that is related to customer. So the ID of this record that's linked to the customer field. So here you can use now the ID from the case is created step. So now that we are this far ahead, let's look for customer. So the customer is the field on the case in our trigger. And as I mentioned always, when you look for that field and it's a lookup, you use value, always the value, because a lookup is not very traditional. It will not just have one option when you search for the field. It will give you three options because a lookup is comprised of three properties. Especially if you're a beginner, you should learn to avoid these two, but slowly and gradually, as you spend more time with Power Automate, you will learn to use how all of this works. So for now, just use as a rule of thumb, you search the field and the first thing that you pick up is the one that has value in it. All right, so I've selected this now. Now that we've selected this, we can fetch the property of the customer record that is associated with the case. So this is what we're asking a flow to do. Mr. Flow, we have selected the step called get a row by ID, and then I have selected accounts. Please go to the account table and get all the properties of this ID. Okay, let's now see that we have retrieved the property here. Do we get annual revenue? And I search for annual revenue, and yes. And if you look at this, it is under a new section that's called get the account property. So if I remove this, there will be three sections now because we have three steps. It shows you the property of everything. So these are all the fields that are existing on customer field. That is basically a reference to the account table to a certain record, which is this. I'm trying to say as much as I can to make sure that it really makes sense, because as a beginner, it is very hard to get. And so I hope this helps. So I'm just going to type now annual revenue. And then I say if the annual revenue is equal to, no, is greater than 100K, and I will mention 100K, and I will give it a logical name. If annual revenue is more than 100K, then what do you want me to do? Mr. Flow, if this condition is true, I want you to, and this is when it's true, you should put it, if yes, the action here. What we want to do, we want to update the record, the case record, with a priority high. So the action says something like update a record. So let's try to find something. And where do we need to find it? In Dataverse. And there are a lot of steps. Add a row? No. Delete a row? No. Download a file? No. Get a row ID? No. List rows? No. Bound action? No. No, I don't know what this is. No, I don't know. No, no, no. And then update a row. This makes more sense. So we say update a row, and now the flow will ask you, okay, I will update a row, but can you tell me what table do you want me to look into? I said, okay, yes. Get me the table. Go to the case table. It says, can you be a bit more precise? Because in the case table, I have like so many records, so many rows. What do I do? Then you say, I will give you the exact identifier for you to find that guy. So I will give you case ID. So when you type case, again, you will see so many fields. Don't be overwhelmed with that. You just need to know where you need to point out to. As I mentioned, there it gives you the possible case related fields in all the three actions above, but you need to focus more on the case, this one. And it's also good practice to use your common sense to see what case are we talking about? Are we talking about the case that's specified on case investigation? Are we talking about the case that triggered this flow? Both the things are same because we are using the same case here and here, but sometimes you have complex scenarios where you have multiple cases, and then you need to know what case are we talking about. So you need to find the reference of that case in the right step. So in this case, I'm going to use when a case is created because that led to running this flow. So here, when a case is created, and then here I will look for case, unique identifier, this is it. Now I've told, please update a row. Which row? For case table, go to this row and update the priority to, and I have all the fields that I can update, so I can update any of these fields if I want. But and if I don't see them, I just say show advanced options, and it shows me more fields. And then I say priority, make it high, and then I give it a logical name. Update the priority to high, and I will collapse it. This makes complete sense now. So if I were to read this requirement, when a case is created, create a case investigation for the owner of the case, because that's what we did. When I open this, I see that the case is created for the owner of the case because I refer to the owner of the case that's here. And then I say get the account property records. Why? Because I need that ahead. If the annual revenue is more than 100K, so that's what I add a condition for. Annual revenue is greater than 100K, update the priority to high. This was the requirement that we received from the customer, right? So now we can go ahead and save it. And we will create a new case. So the flow is saved. Let's go back to cases and say new case. Let's test it. High priority testing. Let's call the case this. And the customer we want to use on purpose Coffee Lab ABJ because we know the annual revenue specified for this customer is 200K. So when I save this record, a case investigation should be created and the priority should change to high. So I'm saving the record now. The moment I save the record, my changes are not going to be visible immediately because it shows you what's right now. But when the flow is done making, the Power Automate flow is done making the changes, then you will see them here. So when I refresh it, one more time, sometimes it takes a bit of a time for the flow to run. Yeah, the case investigation is updated. When you try and refresh, the priority is high. It goes faster than this. I'm not sure why it took so long, but we do know why it took so long. So if I go back to case investigation for our owner, and this is now trying to not only learn how to do automation, but try to make it faster. So it ran 21 seconds ago, and it took 2 seconds. If I were to look into the logs, which is important for us to now know and make this flow even better. Here, when I click on this, I say, what I do is, it says that I'm going to this account and I'm going to fetch everything that I have for this row ID. But if you have a look at this, it gets you all of the information. Do we really need all of this? It's technical, but what it basically says, if you want to read this, it says, for this record, I'm getting email address field, it's this one. Number of employees, this one. But are we even using these fields ahead? No, right? So this is costing your service to take more time. Although it's already so fast, it says 0 second, but when you have complexer flows, you can make it a bit smarter. So how do we really tell the flow to only get the fields that I need ahead? I've completed the flow now and I know it's not going to be more than this. So I can tell it, and this is just the cherry on top. If you don't want to listen it, stop the video, just don't browse ahead. But if you're keen on making it also more performance-wise better and take tips also from a performance point of view, then continue. And here we learn about select columns. When you're asking the flow and just giving these two parameters, you're just asking it to say, go to account records and get me all the properties of the row ID, regardless of yeah, what I need. But you can also provide select column. Here you can give the flow. You can give a list of columns that you want to use ahead, because otherwise you're saying get me 100 columns, and it will take more time to get 100 columns. But if you say get me only one column, then it will get you only one column. So we need only one from account, the annual revenue. So if I were to get the logical name of this, how would I get it? I would go here um, to any account record. And this is again a tip for you. If you want to get the logical name, because in the select column, you cannot provide, say, annual revenue, it will fail. Flows always work with technical names. So what you need to do is, for annual revenue, you need to get the technical name. For that, I would recommend going here in Level Up, clicking on all fields, and now you can search for the field annual revenue. Annual, oh, I got nothing. But sometimes it's a bit deceptive. The field shows the name on the front with some name, but its technical name may be a little bit different. So I would also search for revenue. And when I do that, I see that, yes, I do have revenue. And revenue is this. And don't use the one that says base. Just use the one that's normal. So click on revenue and put it here. And now you're telling the flow, what this means is go to account table, get the property of this record, not all the properties when I move to the third line, but only the revenue. So now it knows that it's only need to go to get the revenue. And then you can test it again, succeeded. It will end up creating one more record for investigation, but this is just for testing purposes. And then this is just to show that this will succeed as well. And it worked almost instantly. Yes. Yes. So this was everything that I want to talk about, at least in this session for Power Automate, how you can create your own Power Automate flow, what are automations, how you can realize those automations using Power Automate, how you can make a Power Automate more efficient, triggers, actions, how to work with Dataverse. But there is more. So Power Automate is not just going to be one session. Power Automate itself is going to be multiple sessions, because this is the core. When you work with as a Dynamics functional consultant, most of the things that you will be working on, this customizing tables, which is my previous video about adding more columns, but also a major part of it is also going to be working with Power Automate flow, especially with Dataverse, but also sometimes outside Dataverse. You will also have requirements of sending email messages, sending Teams, and all of that is super possible with Power Automate flow. And that is what I want to close off with. When you click on a new step, instead of Dataverse, if you look at this, there are so many different actions. If you search for Teams, it will be there. If you want to get the weather app, it will be there. If you want to get on location, there will be something for that as well. And if you want to get something for mails, you will have that. You will see Outlook. And there are so many connectors. It's really open source, and more organizations are now trying to have a connector for Power Automate, so that it's very easy for you to communicate with these organizations and get relevant data. In our next video, we're going to talk more in details on Dataverse. There are more actions that you should definitely learn about, even if you're a beginner. So we'll talk more into that. But for now, go ahead and practice this. Use your own imagination, like I gave you as an example, to add any kind of row, any kind of account. It's entirely up to you. What you see in the model-driven app, you can use any of these tables to basically do some testing, to create your own Power Automate flows, and try. And if you have any questions, comments, or anything that you would like to know in specific, just put them as comments, and I'll see if I can make some videos on that as well. In the meantime, have fun and happy learning.